Welcome back to another frosty day here in the blacksmith shop. It's a little bit warmer than it was yesterday, so it's not going to be as bad. The sun is up. I think it might actually get close to 40 degrees outside today. So by the time we're done, it ought to be pretty nice in here. Now in yesterday's video, we made this little flower hook, and I used a curved chisel to start cutting out most of the petal shapes for the flower. Problem is, my curved chisel broke halfway through that, so I had to finish it with a straight chisel. A little bit more work, not a big deal, but a curved chisel would have been nice. And now I don't have one of this size anymore, so I need to make another one. But let's take a look at the failure of that chisel a little bit. Why did it fail? Well, I can't tell you 100% for sure why it failed, but I have some pretty good theories, and a lot of it goes back to my skill at the time I made this tool. Now, this tool is one I've probably had 20 years, maybe I've had it longer. I've done a lot of work with it, so it really served me fairly well, but it still should not have broken in what I was doing yesterday. Now, the number one thing I think comes down to tool design. There's a fairly sharp shoulder here and a fairly crisp little inside corner. And if that same corner existed on this side, which is where the break is, and it looks like there may have been a little nick in there from the edge of the anvil. It's really kind of hard to say for sure, but if there was a stress point there, that might lead to a crack. Now, the other thing, looking at the grain structure on this piece, and it may be kind of hard for you to see that in the camera. I need a macro lens, and it's even better if you have a microscope, which I do not. But this looks really big here, and if the grain structure is big, it's just easier for a tool to crack. It's easy for it to find a path of least resistance along the larger grain growth. I also see here the grain is very fine right on this corner, which implies that it wasn't heated very evenly in the original heat treat. So what then does all that tell me about this tool? It tells me that my initial forging probably wasn't as clean and smooth as it should have been, but it also tells me that my heat treat process was off somewhere. There are two reasons for bigger grain growth. For one thing, I may not have normalized or annealed it properly, which is a vital step when you're working with tool steels. After you're done forging, steel is really stressed out, and if you don't normalize it, if you don't anneal it, it stays stressed out, and it's more likely to crack when you heat treat it or in use later. And by normalizing or anneal, you help reduce the grain growth, you de-stress it, and things are a whole lot better. Now, the other thing that I suspect probably happened is that I may have brought it up to too high a temperature. As you bring this up to heat to harden, the grain structure grows, it gets bigger. And just a few hundred degrees over the manufacturer's recommended hardening temperature can result in much bigger grain growth. It makes a tool brittle. It's really not a good idea. So overheating tools in heat treat is simply bad practice. Unfortunately, this looks like it was made from an old cold chisel, and I probably had no idea what that material is. I still have no idea what it is. It doesn't matter. It's going in the scrap bin this afternoon. But it's real easy to get the hardening and tempering parameters off on an unknown steel because you don't know what they are. Plus, back then, I was just hardening and tempering by eye, and I'm sure I was overheating things all the time because it's really easy to go just a little bit too hot, and it's real hard to recognize just the right color, which is one of the reasons I like using an electronic heat treat oven these days. It gives me the perfect temperature. I can look up the manufacturer's specs. There's no guesswork involved. However, today we might do a little bit of guesswork. We're going to make a replacement tool out of Flutagon that I just got in the mail. This is the Atlantic 33. It's one of those steels that seems like it's too good to be true. You forge it, you quench it in water, you use it, you don't temper it. It has a wide range of acceptable hardening temperatures. The hotter it is when you quench it, the harder the tool is. But it seems like it is more forgiving about that stuff, at least based on the little bit of information that you can find online. This comes in 12-inch pieces, so I cut a piece of the 3/4-inch material down to 6 inches. That's enough to make 2 tools out of. We're going to go ahead and make the curved chisel out of one of them, see how it does. And this will be my first experience using the Atlantic 33 or the Flutagon. The information I have been able to find on the Atlantic 33 says that it needs to be forged at a relatively high temperature. So that's kind of in a lemon yellow range. So we'll get this good and hot. I've preheated my anvil, so it's not going to cool off too fast on the anvil. And I'm going to start with the struck end. I'm just going to taper it a little bit, forge the struck end kind of to an octagon shape, just to make a little bit nicer looking tool. But the center section of the tool, the part that you hold on to, I'm going to leave the flutes in, mostly so I know that this was made from Flutagon. I suppose at some point I'll get a stamp that says Atlantic 33 or Flutagon or something like that so I can mark this stuff. But for this tool, I'll just leave the flutes in it, and I'll know what steel it was made from. But it also gives a nice grippy surface that will help control a handheld tool. So after the struck end is finished, we'll draw out the part that's going to be the curved chisel. This is really all I want to do to the struck end. And just make sure it's straight. And we'll turn it around and work on the other end. When you're making smaller diameter curved chisels, the best way to do that is just with a file. That gives you a perfect radius. Just get a file the exact size you want the inside diameter. I have round files in every size I could get. And you just file that radius in there, and then you shape the outside. And it's pretty easy, and this is really a no-forge tool. This is all done with file and grinder. But for these larger radius ones, I would have to start with a piece of 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch material to make a chisel, and it'd just be a big heavy tool. So I'm going to go ahead and draw it out and spread it so that I can then forge it to the round shape. I'm just going to draw it out in one dimension and let it spread in the width. That previous tool, I had a shoulder. I must have offset it on the edge of the anvil and done half-face blows. I am not going to do that with this tool. I'm going to transition in nice and slowly and get it hot again. Just going to make that end parallel. And get it as straight as I can. And I'm also going to push this all off to one side. It tapers evenly from both sides. And I'm going to want it all flat, and then I'll curve it towards the side that's not flat. So the outer edge of the curve will be on the flat side. So that's flat across here. Next heat, we'll go ahead and curve it. Now this swedge is pretty close to the radius of the first tool that broke, but it's not exact, so I'm not sure what I forged this in, because I can't find a swedge exactly that size, but this one will come very close. This tool will be finished with files, grinders, whatever it takes to get everything nice and smooth. I just want to forge it as close to the finished size and shape as I can. Things that transition from flat to curve always end up with sort of a little kink right where it transitions. I just want to try and get that out of there. Again, some of that will be ground out. This will be a much nicer tool than the one we broke. Okay, we didn't break it, I broke it. I shouldn't blame you guys. I'm going to go ahead and put my touch mark on it. Well, I've gone ahead and touch marked this over at the treadle hammer, and I'm just going to let this cool off slowly with the lining of the gas forge while I go run some errands. Then I'll come back probably after lunch, file it, grind it, whatever it needs, then do the hardening and tempering step. Now the normalizing and annealing of this Atlantic 33 or Flutagon is sort of a mystery. None of the information I found online talks about whether you need to normalize it and anneal it, how you should normalize it or anneal it. It's hard to say. It's a water hardening steel, so it should normalize. But the chemistry of the steel is completely different than most of the tool steels we work with. Generally, we're talking about carbon content to make steel harder. My understanding is that this steel has a relatively low carbon content compared to most tool steels. It's the other things that are in this steel that make it special and also make it forgiving of somewhat different heat treat practices, like quenching in water and then not tempering it. So it may not need to be normalized and annealed. I'm not sure. None of the information I've been able to find says one way or the other. Maybe while I'm waiting for this, I'll send a message to Brent and ask him, because Brent Bailey really is the expert on this steel as far as I can tell. I'm just using whatever means I have at my disposal to clean up that inside radius. I don't have a half round file that's exactly the right size. So I've used a combination of a small wheel on the belt grinder. I've used round files, I've used the die grinder, just whatever seems to fit the best. But in any case, this is now ready to harden. And I would say harden and temper. But again, supposedly this doesn't need any tempering. So we're going to go get it hot and we're going to harden it. Like I do most times when I'm hardening and tempering, I'm just going to let this soak in the forge for a little bit, get a good thorough heat all the way down into that. But I only need it hot for the last inch, inch and a half, something like that. I don't need it hot all the way up the shank. So it's getting really pretty close to what I want. Give it just a few minutes in there to soak, turn the forge back on, make sure I quench at a rising heat, and it should be ready to sharpen and use. It is certainly the simplest steel to harden and temper since there is no tempering. Let's check it with a file and see if it really got hard. That's pretty hard. Normally I would want to temper it at this point, but they say you don't need to, so I'm not going to bother. We'll see how it performs. I've taken the curved chisel back to the grinder, sharpened it. Now it's time to test it out. And one good way to test out a curved chisel to make sure your radius is correct. It's one thing for it to cut well and hold up, but ideally you should be able to inscribe a perfect circle with a chisel like this. So you just take a scrap and keep following the curve around and see if they connect when you get to the other end. And so far, this seems to be doing quite well. I just got off a little bit. My fault, not the chisels. Let's go to the other side here. See if we can reconnect where we started. And that made a perfect circle, so I got the radius just right. And you could cut all the way through if you wanted to. I don't know that I would cut holes with a chisel like this. I'm usually doing profile work or something and cutting the edge of an element. But if you just needed a big hole, you can make a big chisel and work your way through. The cutting edge looks like it's holding up just fine. Still feels good and sharp. And I've knocked these corners back a little bit so it doesn't leave gouge marks, which makes this a little bit easier to follow around when you're doing this kind of a thing. So all in all, I'm very happy with this. I think it's going to be an excellent replacement for the one I broke. Should be a way better chisel in the long run. It's a much cleaner forging, a much better job of shaping the curve. Everything about it is better. At this point, it's just a matter of testing out this new steel to see if I really like it, see how it behaves in the long run. So at this point, I'm not necessarily recommending you'll go out and buy this and replace all your tools with Atlantic 33 or Flutagon tool steel, because this is the only tool I've made out of this, and it may be a couple of years before I really have a good firm opinion. But I'm going to use all the steel I bought. I'm going to make some other tools with it. I might make some hardy tools, and I will certainly be making some punches and drifts and things like that to use under the power hammer. And then we're going to see how they perform. For that matter, I think I'm going to try and think up some projects that just need a curved chisel so that we can explore the use of this tool, give it a little bit more of a trial, use it for 3 or 4 projects, see how the edge holds up, see if the end mushrooms over, just generally see how it performs. Since I commented on this steel in a video last night, I've already received a few comments from people who have used this. In general, they really like it. One person said that it does work harden, which means you may have to keep an eye on it if you're using them for cold use, that the edges might get overly hard and become brittle. You might need to do some sort of tempering then. I'm really not sure, but in hot work, they're kind of tempering all the time. And the other thing would be to keep an eye on the struck end and see if they start to act like they're really hard. And maybe every time you need to redress the tool, you might just heat it up with a torch a little bit, bring it up to a blue color or something, just to guarantee it's not work hardening. But we'll see if that's really necessary or not. It's an easy matter to test it with a file and see if the struck end is hard. which right now it is not. So every now and then if I just do that, maybe I'll get an idea of whether or not that's really a problem or not. Just some of the things I'm going to think about as I explore the uses of the Atlantic 33 steel. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button. Feel free to stick around, watch a few of the other videos, share the videos with your friends and on social media, but then make time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next one.